everybody. Welcome. This is our 18th Design Wednesday, and we have a really special guest for you. Who's new to Design Wednesdays? Okay, a few people. So every month, usually it's the third Wednesday of the month, we meet here and we talk about design, about innovation, technology, and today we have all the way from San Francisco, my former colleague and actually my former boss, Dave Eresian. He's a design director at Spring Studio and has been for the last 4 years. So he's been with BBVA as a subsidiary for 3 years. And prior to that, he was a design director at Hot Studio, also in San Francisco, purchased by Facebook. So I'm sensing a pattern here with you, Dave.
It's true.
You join design firms and then they get bought.
Yes.
So Dave is a fantastic teacher, a great mentor. He was an awesome boss. And he's going to talk to you guys tonight about prototyping. And we're going to do a fun little challenge where you're going to work in teams and do some prototyping tonight. So with that, Dave.
All right. Thanks so much. You guys are so lucky to have Mary. You guys stole Mary away from Spring Studio a few years ago, and she is just one of a kind, amazing leader, teacher, and designer, and prototyper, doer. She just makes things happen. It's quite amazing to see the impact that she and her team are having on the organization and through events like this on the design community here. So I'm out here, I'm collaborating with Mary and her team on some master classes on prototyping. They have Mary's and team have put together a whole curriculum of design thinking education, and they have worked with over 1,000 employees throughout the BBVA organization doing design thinking training, and now they're creating follow-on classes in facilitation and visual thinking and prototyping. So I'm here prototyping a pilot of a prototyping class, which we're doing and learning through that experience. And so I was excited to have the opportunity to just speak a little bit tonight about prototyping and have a conversation with folks here. I named this talk "Get Out of Your Head" because as designers, I think we tend to spend a lot of time in our heads and in discussion, writing on sticky notes, creating beautiful strategies, and we're always well served by getting out of our heads and making things with our hands, acting things out, acting services out as a means of getting direct experience with what it is that we're creating. And we also spend a lot of time on our screens, and it's great to get off of our screens. So it was just a shorthand for that. So through today's talk, I just wanted to maybe stretch our concept of what we mean by prototyping and share some examples from a few different industries about of people using prototypes in different ways, and to just observe some of the principles that they're using. So let's look at a first example here, prototyping fast food. So in the 1950s, there was no such thing as fast food. And there were two brothers named McDonald's that wanted to create a restaurant that would be able to prepare food rather than in 30 minutes to have it prepared in 30 seconds. That was their concept. And so in order to do that, they needed to do a lot of design work and process work and choreography and invent a bunch of little devices in order to be able to execute on that. And there's a film that came out a few years ago called The Founder that describes and shows a little bit about how they went about prototyping. And so I'm just going to share this little scene here, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
We're going to love how we did it, Dick. You got to tell him.
Tennis court?
Okay. He brings me out to this tennis court, and he's drawn this line, the exact dimensions of our kitchen.
Sink on the right, extruder on the left. Extruder. Bagging and hood.
Hood. Okay.
Garnish. This is burger finish.
Got it.
And then this is burger slide. We could just move those.
Okay.
Multi-mixer soft drinks.
Okay. We bring out our whole staff, and we have them go through the motions, making pretend burgers and fries.
All right, Steve, anticipate that. You gotta keep the tray level. Okay.
And Dick is running around with this stick, marking where all the equipment should be.
Tuck in. Tony, are you gonna skip the pickles when we're really doing it?
They do it over and over, hashing it out, choreographing it like some crazy burger ballet.
What's going on over there?
Yes. No. No. Everybody stop! Stop! Garnish 1. Garnish 2. You've got pickles, you've got onions. It's a goddamn hamburger.
Come on, clear off.
It's a masterful facilitation
Time for the
technique
pink
for
chalk.
body storming. You just
And then
scold
rip your orange.
participants.
See all this open space here now? We've rearranged the fry situation, so now it's stage left, the deep fryer stage right. Begin. That's great. Come on, guys.
They're pretty tied up here.
Yeah, watch it.
The Lazy Susan.
It's the timing of the Lazy Susan. Those are finished burgers. You can't... Hold it. I still think there's a third version.
What do you want to move?
I want to move everything.
Back to stage left, please.
I think we got it all drawn.
It's also useful to play dramatic music when you're body storming. It really helps
so.
to build the
I guess
emotion.
let's assume our battle stations.
Okay.
Finally,
It's not
after about 6 hours of this, we get it just right.
These are the
It's
McDonald's
a
brothers,
symphony
and
of
then there's
efficiency,
rock
not a
concept.
wasted motion.
Serves the completed product, the completed design. This is evolution.
Good form, Jasper. You feel good about those pickles. Catch up. Use your Lazy Susan. Put your back into it, Seth. And pickles and pickle and mustard.
We take the layout to a builder, custom build the kitchen to our exact specs.
Ta-da! The Speed D system is born, the world's first ever system to deliver food fast. It is totally revolutionary.
Okay, so what can we notice about their approach to this? Anybody have any observations? Failing, yeah. So they were experimenting and they were failing and then recovering. And what are some of the things that made it easy to recover from those failures? Chalk. So they're using really lo-fi. They weren't in their actual kitchen trying to lift up heavy pieces of equipment and move it around. They just had chalk. Any other observations about how they did this prototyping? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe instead of trying to reason logically, what would be the best strategy? They just tried it out and
Yes, that's a really good point. So they didn't make flow charts. They may have made some flow charts initially, but they didn't spend a lot of time flow charting. They didn't, at least in the way this story is told. Hey, there are more seats up in the front if you want to come up. Sí, hay unos aquí, hay 3, 4 en frente. Bienvenidas. So they did start doing things early, and that's another one of the hallmarks of prototyping approach is a bias toward action and starting to do things, make things as soon as you can, because that's how you start learning. Just simple equipment, and I heard that they they actually, in the real world, they didn't do this all in one afternoon. They did this over a series of a couple days, and it actually rained in between, and their nature wiped away some of their thinking, but they were able to recover. So at the highest level, it's important to get out of our heads, and of course it's important to have a vision. They had this vision that they wanted to create food very quickly, but they set out trying to actually just experiment. It's important to have a clear goal and think strategically. It's important to ideate with Post-its and debate with colleagues and to do your desk research and learn from the experience of others, but don't wait too long before you make something tangible, or you, in this case, you act something out. If you're working on a process or a service, then that's the way you're going to learn, by getting that direct experience with what you're trying to create. They're prototyping the experience itself. So this is another thing I think that's important to think about, is that our prototypes, sometimes it's easy to think about prototyping as a particular phase of our process, where first we're going to understand, and then we're going to ideate, and then we're going to prototype in order to be able to put something in front of people and get feedback. But in reality, you can start prototyping from very early on in your process as a means of understanding, as a means of ideating, as well as communicating and getting feedback from people. And as you prototype, you want to try to prototype not just the artifact. I'm not just prototyping in order to create an envision prototype. I'm prototyping in order to recreate or simulate that experience that envision prototype is going to create. So if you're working on an envision prototype that's going to enable people to split the bill, to divide la cuenta up between several people, then consider recreating that environment or that situation and going out to a restaurant with some colleagues and role-playing that, so that you'll get other ideas about how that might work beyond if you're just making your screens a clickable prototype. So it's just a little bit broader thinking about how to prototype and simulate things. They're using a process here that's related to body storming, and this is a theatrical technique where you're it's like embodied prototyping, where you're actually putting yourself into the experience. You're brainstorming. So the term body storming, when I first heard it, I didn't understand what the idea was, but the concept is that we're familiar with brainstorming, where we're generating ideas with our brains, and body storming is generating ideas with our bodies. So by putting ourselves into different situations, we are able to develop deeper empathy for the people and what they might be feeling, and we're able to develop new ideas. So it's quite inspiring. You can perform it instead of describing it, feel it not only tactily but emotionally. What does it feel like? And you can figure it out by trying it out, like this woman in the back was saying. Okay, oops. Experience prototyping methods enable designers, clients, or users to experience it themselves rather than witnessing a demonstration or someone else's experience. So in design thinking, we often say show, don't tell. And this is the same kind of idea, that we want to, rather than explaining something to somebody else or creating a presentation type prototype, a presentation video that demonstrates what the experience will be like, so you can watch it. Try to challenge yourself to find a way to recreate that experience so that people that you want to communicate or get feedback from can actually experience it themselves. Another thing that I mentioned in passing around body storming and other embodied prototyping experiences, prototyping methods, is that it can build empathy. So sometimes we think about body storming as being, it can even seem kind of silly or not too productive. If people are all dressed up and pretending that they're a machine or something like that, those can be really productive exercises. But you can also do body storming with a service or a process like they did with the McDonald's brothers, where you're really playing seriously and you're developing empathy for, in that case, you're developing empathy for what it's like to actually be working in the kitchen and how to make that process work in as efficient way as possible. But if you are body storming the experience of two people coming in to get financial coaching from someone, if you're body storming that with your colleagues, you can develop a lot of empathy for what it means to actually come into a branch to get financial coaching, for example. So it's a fun way to develop empathy. And I think it's interesting to think about body storming becoming increasingly valuable for gestural interfaces and for AR and VR experiences, where we need to start designing things that are integrating with the real world, and we need to understand what it means and how to best orchestrate experiences that involve a mix of virtual and real objects. So body storming can be potentially increasingly valuable. Okay, so that was the first kind of example of prototyping using the fast food as one example. Let's look at another example from another industry, and in this time, prototyping devices. So there's a lot of interesting, inspiring stories around the teams at Google X and the Google Glass team. Does anyone know how long it took them to develop the first physical prototype of for the Google Glass? That's a good guess. The day that they kicked off the project, they started prototyping, and it took them just 2 hours to create their first prototype. And once again, they used very primitive materials. It's a little bit hard to see here, but Larry Page is wearing a coat hanger around his neck. Oops. And has a sheet protector as a screen. A sheet protector is like a thin piece of plastic, clear plastic that you put over sheets to protect it. So they quickly realized that they were talking about creating some kind of heads-up display where you could display information superimposed over the real world. And they wanted a way of recreating that experience. And so they quickly created this thing with the sheet projector as your screen that you can see through, and a coat hanger to secure it, and something plexiglass to support it, and a notebook, computer, and a little projector. And they were able to put this together in a couple of hours. Obviously, they got some very smart people working on this as well. But they got out of their heads and started creating this experience. And Tom Chi, who is one of the co-founders of Google X and who's the lead on this project, he's worth looking up, and he talks a lot about rapid prototyping. He's just talks all the time about it's important to get direct experience with what you're designing. He also talks about the importance of trying out multiple options. So they created 150 hardware prototypes in 10 weeks. So that's about 15 prototypes per week, hardware, experimenting with different things like how many, Is it going to be on one side or both sides? Is it going to be weighted toward the front or the back? Or how are the gestures going to work? All kinds of different things to prototype. And while Google has a lot of resources, according to Tom Chi, they spent just $20,000 on this over 10 weeks to develop all these prototypes to inform their design. So try out multiple options. It's better to make a few less ambitious prototypes than a bigger one-shot prototype. This is another thing to keep in mind, which sometimes we may be inclined to feel that we need to prototype the whole experience. And that's not true. You can choose parts of the experience that are important to learn about, particularly those that might be the most risky or the ones that have the most unknowns to you. Choose those and find creative ways to focus. You can set context for whoever it is that you're getting feedback from. Say, we're not interested in this part, we're graying out this part of the experience, and we want you to just focus on this, and please try out this experience and see what you think. So better to create some smaller ones and then put all your eggs in one basket. And it's all about maximizing the rate of learning. So you want to be able to learn as quickly as possible by making it easy and fast to create ideas. Let's look at another example. This is an example from the film industry in Pixar. So we borrowed, the design industry borrowed the storyboarding method from film, and we use it. It's an essential tool, and it's interesting to see how Pixar and other film companies use storyboards. So in my experience, it's common to print out well, we make storyboards collaboratively, and that's a big part of the benefit, is just the process of thinking through a storyboard. But we may share storyboards by printing them out. Maybe we put them on the wall, or we pass them out to different people. And by contrast, at Pixar, they do story pitches where they have a meeting where they go into a small theater that's a little bit bigger than this, maybe twice the size of this room, and the storyboard artist will pitch their story, and they'll bring that storyboard to life by narrating it, and we can watch an example of this. And notice that the storyboard artist is saying, what we're trying to do is to recreate as closely as possible the experience of being in a theater watching this film. But they're doing it in a low fidelity way as a means of creating a shared vision of what they're creating and providing a platform for collaboration. So he also mentions that their process is it's not that the writers write the script and then the animators animate it and it's like a linear process. There's a lot of back and forth, and by prototyping or bringing acting out these storyboards, that's one way that they enable this type of collaboration. Let's see if this is going to play.
Once we kind of make your first pass, then everybody gets into that story room, and we basically do this thing where we pitch the scene, which I'm going to do for you right now. It's kind of a fun thing. Basically, what I'm doing is taking all my boards, and I'm going to try and pitch you the scene so you feel like you're actually watching the movie as closely as possible. So let me just kind of do it. So we'll all get together in that story room. Director, producer, story team, head of story. We'll all be there. The writers will all be in there. And then like, okay, great. We all gather in the room, and the manager will set it up like, okay, we're here to watch Rivalry. This is the first scene in the movie, and Kelsey has storyboarded it, and and gives little particulars like, and we want to deliver it hopefully by Friday, and then okay, great, Kelsey, go. And so we all look up here at the screen, and then I pitch it. So we're on this sign. We see it says Frighten Elementary, and then we hear a kid off screen. Okay, everybody, line up. And we adjust over, and we see a bunch of kids on a playground. Jablonski. This little kid runs forward. Touchburn. They're like picking teams. Another guy runs forward. Lee. Fielding. And then we hear this character off screen. Hey, excuse me, watch it. Move out of the way. Look out. Hey, hey. Pardon me, ma'am. Move it, slime ball. And then we see little tiny Mike Wazowski come up. Sorry, I'm late. So, whose team am I on?
Okay, so they're pitching the scene so that you feel like you're watching the movie. And this is something that we can consider, maybe not exactly literally, but you can consider reading storyboards out loud, enacting storyboards, and even asking if you want a stakeholder or another member of your team to develop empathy for a particular situation or a deeper understanding of a particular flow, you can role play that storyboard with that other person. And it's a little bit more accessible and less silly feeling than body storming might be. You can also write, even if you haven't developed a storyboard, you can script out an experience and act out that experience. If you're interested, you can ask me more about that afterwards. So we know that communication is challenging, and that we might think that we have just presented our design documents and our storyboards and our sketch files, and we all have a shared vision and everybody agrees. But in fact, we all may have different ideas in our minds of what that is. And these shared documents and conversations are not always enough. We need to make things tangible. We know that visual communication is great for this, and that by sketching and designing, discussing and sketching, that we co-create this shared vision of what it is that we're talking about. And we all come to have a truly shared understanding. And prototyping is really kind of the ultimate tool in developing that shared understanding. I threw in a simple example of a failed communication or of a shared vision where someone has written directions for how to decorate a cake, and it was misunderstood. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a prototype is worth 10,000 words. It's not just a visual, but it's experiential communication. It's not just an idea in my head, but it's something that I can see a customer reacting to. We want to show rather than tell, and showing experience or experiencing experience is the ultimate. Let's look at another example. There were two people working on a team at IDEO, working on a children's application called Elmo's Monster Maker. And they, two of the designers on the team, had an idea for a feature on this game that was going to enable Elmo to dance. And the client that they were working with didn't seem to get the idea and was going to cut the idea. And so they were just about to have this call, and they said, let's make a prototype of this thing to try to communicate what it is. And so here's how they prototyped this.
Music. So this is possible dance moves for Monster Maker. So music starts, and I'm the player, so I come in and I touch the monster, and he gives me a special dance move. I go and touch again, and he does a different one. And it can go for as long as I want, and he has a few signature moves. And when I've had enough and I'm done dancing, I touch the back button, and it pauses and the music stops. Monster Maker.
Cool.
That's all I can. That's all I can.
Wow.
So what they've done here is they printed out a huge picture of an iPhone, and they cut a hole in the middle of it, and they body stormed this experience. And they were able to do this in a little over an hour, and it was a really effective way to communicate the experience. And they didn't try to create a clickable version of this thing. He didn't dress up like Elmo. They concentrated on just trying to capture the essence of the experience that they thought that kids would enjoy. And that was an effective way of building that shared vision and building alignment and confidence with the broader team. That when you bring people and prototypes together, you develop confidence, and it gives people the more buy-in for actually believing that something is good, and they want to realize your vision and your product. So it helps as a tool for advocating for ideas. Okay, one more example. This is in the same year that the McDonald's brothers were creating their fast food. There was a sort of there was a contest that was sort of like the X Prize, where they offered $2 million in today's money for a team that could create a human-powered airplane that could fly across the English Channel. So something that people could pedal across or somehow make the airplane go across the English Channel. So 1959, they announced this contest, and about 15 years went by, and a bunch of teams tried. I think over 10 teams tried, but were unable to solve this problem. And an inventor by the name of Paul MacCready became interested in this challenge, and when he observed how the teams were going about solving this challenge, he saw that they were taking almost a year to design and build their planes, and then they would test them, and there would be either it would crash, or it would be too heavy for someone to power with their body, and then they would have to rebuild and go back and try to figure out how to iterate on it. But it was very long design cycles, and so what this guy Paul MacCready realizes that it was important to design something that he would be able to iterate with his team very quickly. So they built something out of mylar and aluminum tubes and wire. And it was too flimsy at first, and it took them about a year before they actually arrived at a solution. But they did solve it within a year, and they won this prize. So feedback and iteration leads to better ideas and outcomes, and a takeaway from that, like some of these other prototypes we've looked at, is the value of, like you were saying, learning early with low-cost experiments. The best kinds of failures are early on, so you have plenty of time to learn and iterate. And you learn as much from failures, or probably more from failures, than from successes. So I want to just summarize with a few prototyping principles that are sort of evidenced by these different industries. Oh no, you know what that means? It's time for Name That Prototype. This is the game where we show a prototype and the contestants get to guess what this product is that has been prototyped, okay? So let's look at our first category. The first category is products. And here is the first prototype. Who can name that prototype? Yes. The computer mouse. Yes, exactly. Does anybody know when this computer mouse was first created? The XY position indicator for display system was developed in the 1960s by Doug Engelbart when he was at Stanford Research Lab, and was later used at Xerox PARC. There's a kind of the mother of all demos, which you should check out. Oh, thanks, Sancho. The mother of all demos, which you should check out when they first reveal sort of the first graphical human interface. Okay, next category, physical spaces. Who can name that prototype? Yes, Zoolander.
What is this?
A center for ants?
What? How can we be expected to teach children to learn how to read if they can't even fit inside the building?
Derek, it's just a
I don't want to hear your excuses. The center has to be at least 3 times bigger than this.
Okay, next example, next category, intangibles. Yes. Yes, very nicely done. So, musicians also will create demos or scratch sketches of their songs. So this is a sketch of Billie Jean before Michael Jackson had the lyrics for it. You can hear, it's a little hard to hear, but he's just improvising lyrics. So he's using this as a ideation tool and a communication tool, a collaboration platform, enabling other people to get to come and contribute to his tune, and a means of advocating. Okay. Okay, so that's all we have time for now, but thank you for playing Name That Prototype. And now back to our regularly scheduled program where we're talking about prototyping principles. Okay, so one principle, minimize planning, maximize action. Learn by doing as fast as possible. Okay? You can do this by working rough, by starting with something small and focused and doable. Fake it. Be resourceful and creative. Create a facade, as Jake Knapp in the Sprint book talks about. He's got some nice ways of explaining that you can build. It takes a really long time to build a real thing that's good enough to test, but you can build a facade which you can test much earlier and get feedback earlier so that you can respond to it in a timely way. Also important to not invest too much in your prototypes, because the more time you spend on your prototype, the more attached you get to it, and the harder it is to believe that somebody else might not see the things the same way that you do. Make the experience tangible. So if prototyping is about making ideas tangible so that you can learn from them and get feedback, you want to make sure that those prototypes are prototyping experiences as much as possible. Try out multiple options and optimize for learning. So in summary, I just wanted to challenge us to think about prototyping as an approach to solving problems, more than just a project phase or the creation of individual prototypes like envision prototypes, which I love, but it's more than that. And so get out of your head and learn from direct experience. And that's all I wanted to share. Thank you very much. It's fun being here. We're going to do a prototyping activity, and I want to also thank Ansho, who is the mastermind behind Design Wednesday. So thank you for putting this together. And what would you recommend as far as format goes?
There are some questions
Okay.
before we move to the activity.
Yeah.
If you have questions now, we can do the questions.
So, hi Dave, thank you very much for the talk.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you get involved C-level guys into this body storming stuff. Let's say I want to show them something or prove a point, and I have to put them some wigs or make them take a role. And these guys are pretty not into acting. They're more into an Excel cell than into getting into a room and just play out a role. So, what tips do you have for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a lot of experience, and Mary may have more experience with doing body storming with C-level folks than I do. So it's not always the right method. So when you're prototyping, you need to think about what your goals are, and you need to think about who your audience is and who you want to experience your prototype. So a C-level person may be more persuaded by more of a presentation style presentation, maybe a videotape of a body storm. And you don't always have to wear wigs when you're body storming. That's another thing. You can kind of keep it real. Wigs are nice and liberating because they enable us to get outside of our normal persona. But they can get in the way if it makes it seem too silly or not real, because we are trying to prototype real experiences. Does anyone else have thoughts on working with C-level folks, and particularly in the context of service design, body storming, or embodied Did you want to share something? No? Okay.
We've done a lot of work with the C-level here at BBVA across the whole group, and we actually have it on video. Pretty much all of the CEOs of the banks in the BBVA group body storming, sometimes with wigs. But Dave's right.
Some of them need wigs.
The higher the silliness factor, the harder the sell. But what we're seeing is that there seems to be a real movement away from the old way of working, where there's the old presentation and it's very passive. And I think the key to winning the C-level with this stuff is demonstrating not only the prototype itself, but by them interacting with it as a prototype, especially at a low fidelity, that they're saving money and time. So it's a process shift, and oftentimes you think that they're not going to go for it, but then when they come in and they see, and they're working with a kind of a team that's in progress, and we're not stopping to create polished graphics and polished prototypes, they're coming into the workspace and they're seeing the work in action, and that makes it opens the door to them, where they can now interact with it, but they can also give their feedback without feeling like, okay, this is finished work. So I think it's a bigger process of shifting how we interact with management away from this, let's wait a while and then show them something that's done, to let's include them bit by bit into the process. And I think I've seen them really go for body storming and for prototyping in this participatory style. So I start small and really persuade them with the logic of how much time and money we're saving.
Also, adding to that, from our experience here with the sea level doing body storming, I have a tip to share and also a learning from them. The tip is, if you make somehow groups and do it in a competitive way, and you give them 20 minutes to do a body storming, they start running so fast because they see other executives working so hard, building some paper stuff, and they start, hey, they are working a lot, we have to do something. And they start to hurry up. And other interesting thing that in order to make tangible the idea, they need to provide context. And they avoid that usual way of using numbers to provide contents, and they have to share a story about what they are deciding to prototype that thing. And that, for me, one learning from them, because if you change the tools, they change the mindset, as Mary said. And that's all. But we are not here to talk about BBVA. Any more questions?
Okay, well, feel free to come up and chat with me afterwards or send me an email. And should we get into the activity?
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of in following the, in the spirit of the human-powered airplane, I thought that it would be fun to do a paper airplane contest and do this in teams and iteratively. So we're going to work in teams of 4 to 5 people, and we're going to try to create a plane, a paper airplane, that will fly the longest distance. We have a runway back here that we're going to use we're going to do 2 rounds of design. So we're going to work with our teams. I'll explain this a little bit further. You can use paper, you can use paper clips for weight. You can use tape to make your plane more streamlined or aerodynamic. You can use whatever resources you want, but you have to, in terms of learning, but you can only use those materials. It must have some kind of wing, so you can't just make a ball of tape and throw the ball. It has to have some kind of wing, or a wing. Some planes are just, they're kind of like little donuts almost. So here's how we'll structure it. We're going to take 10 minutes to create as many prototypes as you want within your team. You can research, you can do whatever you feel is best to create your prototypes. Choose one of those designs from your team after 10 minutes. And then each team is going to come up to the line, and one by one we'll throw our planes, and we'll see which ones go the furthest and see the ones that go the shortest. And then we're going to discuss. We're going to look at those, the ones that perform the best and the ones that don't perform as well. Sorry about that. And so we'll have the opportunity in step 2 to learn from one another. Then we're going to have 10 more minutes to build on the ideas of others. And again, choose your best plane from your team. And then we're going to choose plane. We're going to do another plane throw, and we'll see how far we can go. I think that we're going to be able to get something that's going to go all the way down to the end of this space here. So it's going to have to go straight as well as long. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions before we start?
The winning team gets, everybody on the team will get, as long as you don't go over 5 people, will get each one will get a copy or a deck of facilitation cards.
First time we provide something free.
Yeah.
So try hard, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so we have materials up here, so feel free to form teams of 4 to 5 people, and I will put a timer up on the screen saying that we have 10 minutes. It looks like you can use this space out here to practice, and I'll call us back together in 10 minutes, and we'll do our first throw. Okay, have fun.